Many who follow me, the few of you that there are, probably already know most of my thoughts on The X from Outer Space, the film by Shochiku. In fact, I did an entire audio commentary on this with Jacob Baker on one of the last season 1 episodes of Creature Feature Double Feature, which is, a podcast, to plug it, where we literally sit down and commentate over 2 horrible science fiction films. These are very long podcasts. But The X from Outer Space is a movie from my childhood. I saw it always on television with Yongari, Monster from the Deep, the Korean film. And I loved these movies so much because they were just so much fun. I remember waking up and my parents laughing at something, and it was this. It was Yongari, Monster from the Deep, and right on after it was The X from Outer Space. And I loved them both, the AIP dub of the film. This movie has a strange cult following, and also has a strange place in film history, believe it or not. This weird and bizarre film. It's kind of funny, actually, if you really look at it. Out of all of the horror and sci-fi movies made at this time from Shochiku, which, there were, War of the Insects, directed by the same guy that directed this. You had The Living Skeleton, which is actually a very good movie. And then you have Gok Body Snatcher from Hell, which I previously reviewed on this show. If you want more information as to why Shochiku, a company known for their melodramas and their serious, dramatic films and so on and so forth, of like Masaaki Kobayashi and even kickstarting Akira Kurosawa, why they were doing these sudden shift in like horror and sci-fi, go watch my Gok Body Snatcher from Hell review. I go into great detail about that there. This, The X from Outer Space, was the only one out of those films, which is a great box set from the Eclipse series from Criterion Collection. This is the only one geared towards kids. The X from Outer Space is the only one that I believe kids can genuinely sit down, watch, and enjoy. I mean, sure, War of the Insects is silly, but it's still very serious and not geared towards children at all, with its themes and so on and so forth. And Gok Body Snatcher from Hell certainly isn't geared for children, and neither is The Living Skeleton. I mean, The Living Skeleton opens with a massacre of children, women, and everyone aboard a ship. Also, The X from Outer Space is the most famous and successful out of those films. This was the first kaiju film to be ever broadcast on television in its original language. In fact, I stayed up to watch it, and I actually recorded it on our DVR when we had Dish. And it was hosted by Robert Osborne on Turner Classic Movies. And I had it taped on my DVR, and I watched it constantly through 7th and 8th grade, and I remember that specifically. And I ate everything up with this film. In fact, it heavily influenced my original kaiju, Gaila, which was the first film I ever made on horrible VHS, and included, like, Gaila was made out of stop motion and stuff like that, which it will never see the light of day, don't even fucking ask. This movie's fucking bizarre. From the jazzy music score by Taku Izumi, which does not fit this film at all, though I'll always remember the song and the theme of this film. The cinematography by Shizu Hirase and Sentura Okashi, where entire scenes just like linger, especially during the monster scenes. There's several shots that just kind of like awkwardly linger, and I don't understand why at all. The script being completely incoherent and making no attempts to establish reality. And it's very clear that this was created by children, for children. No surprises there. The direction by Kizumi Nehomitsu, which is only slightly less weird and awkward than War of the Insects. War of the Insects is a batshit insane film. And the special effects being good, but really clunky. Yet everything negative I will say in this video towards this movie, everything that you'll listen to me say, is why I adore this movie on a selfish standpoint. This movie is the ABCs of what not to do. But not like The Room. Tommy Wiseau's The Room, where everyone was just incompetent, but for instead a genuinely large-scale production. And let's face it, The X from Outer Space was a large-scale production for Shochiku. And this was large-scale because there were Western actors in it, Peggy Neal, and loads of sets just devoted to miniatures and to the depiction of outer space. So it is rather... This is the ABCs of what not to do on a large-scale production. Yet, as the movie went along, the more it struck me why this movie is so weird and bizarre. This movie, The X from Outer Space, feels like two films that smashed together to make one. So, like, you had two 45-minute films, bam, smash them together, and you get The X from Outer Space. On one hand, you have a space opera about trying to figure out why a bunch of spacecraft have gone missing on their way to Mars. And on the other hand, you have a giant monster movie about a mutated space egg that destroys everything in its path. The result is a movie with a giant mess for structure, which is what I was focusing on the most on this recent viewing, and admittedly what I'm focusing most on in this video. The movie takes many detours from the main plot, and I say plot very loosely, during the first half, and takes one horrible one during the second half of the film. The second half of the film is much more enjoyable than the first, I will say that. Some examples of this is the aab-gamma, which is the spaceship that we spend most of this film on, constantly losing connection with FAFC, which is the, this universe's version of NASA. The only reason why I know those names is because we have to listen to the comic relief of this movie, who's, one of the 4 people aboard the ship, say those 2 names hundreds of times over the course of this film. I wish I counted, but I bet you it literally would have been in the hundreds. This flying egg UFO, and that's literally what it looks like, a flying egg UFO, is one of the laziest designs I've ever seen for a UFO, by the way. Appears 3 separate times, but only proves to affect the actual story once. This UFO is what suddenly spews eggs all over the aab-gamma, and which leads to the monster Gilala, which is a fucking ridiculous name. Gilala. It's no wonder that children came up with this title. It's never explained what this UFO is, why it spewed eggs all over the aab-gamma, why it doesn't want people to go to Mars, or anything. There's like almost no purpose for that UFO being there other than that it laid eggs all over the engine of the aab-gamma. So, why have it there at all? They go to the moon after their chief science officer gets space sickness. And I'm not kidding. That had to inspire space dementia from that Michael Bay movie that I can't remember the name of right off the top of my head, which also Criterion Collection released. So when they go on the moon, after like all of our main characters, we have Lisa, Sano, the science officer who gets sick, and then you have the comic relief of the movie. They go on the moon and meet Michiko, who is the other love interest of the movie, other than Lisa. It's an awkward, stupid fucking love triangle, which we'll get into a little later. They decide to go on a few escapades that do nothing to progress this plot at all from them going to Mars, because that's what the plot is. The plot is trying to is to establish that these people want to figure out why these spacecraft, every time they try to go to Mars, go missing. So we're spending about a good 15 to 20 minutes on the moon base of them just walking around, because this includes, alright, but not exclusive to, space jumping, showering, which they describe as synthetic water on the moon, which I'm like, you can't have synthetic water, it's either water or it's not. Explaining why apples on the moon are giant but bland to Earth apples. And most painfully, that love triangle. This love triangle consists of Lisa, who's one of the science officers, Captain Sano, who is the main pilot of the aab-gamma, and Michiko, who is some person of importance, I guess, on the moon base. I hate love triangles. Well, hate's a strong word. There are a few examples of love triangles that I genuinely like, such as the original Godzilla. The original Godzilla, I love the love triangle between Dr. Serizawa, Amiko, and Ogata. But one of the reasons why I love that love triangle so much, I'm only saying that because, this is another kaiju film to compare the X from Outer Space with, is because that love triangle in Godzilla progresses the plot and drives it to the film's end point. This love triangle goes nowhere. But the real reason why I kind of avoid, even in the stuff that I write, avoid love triangles like the plague is because I learned why making Compound of Chaos, the last of the Z trilogy, with the love triangle. But what makes this love triangle, the one between Lisa, Sano, and Michiko, so bad in the X from Outer Space, is just because it goes nowhere. It leads to nothing, except for eventually Lisa learning that Sano is really in love with Michiko, and Michiko really loves Sano back, and blah, 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 blah. Really ham-fisted. And it literally takes up, I'm not kidding, about a third of the film, this focusing on this love triangle. The second time they encounter the UFO, the flying egg, the moon has to send them fuel to basically save them from being stranded in space. And I'm like, this makes that whole detour of them going to the moon and doing all that space walking and everything like that almost pointless. Because suddenly they have to stop again, and then the moon base has to come and save them, and then they go back to Earth. So again, they don't even achieve their fucking mission that they wanted to achieve in the first place. It's not necessary. You know, the fact that the moon base has to, you know, Michiko has to fly out there to save the aab-gamma less than 5 minutes after they take off from the moon base. Instead, what I do is make this the first UFO appearance. And so when the moon base has to come out and, you know, Michiko has to rescue the aab-gamma, have them like, it's almost like they have to tow the aab-gamma back to the moon base, and then have what happens on the moon happen. It would condense literally about 10 minutes of the film down into about, you know, 3 at most 4 minutes. Then Gilala shows up, you know, finally, literally a little over halfway through the film. Gilala shows up, and this is why we really want to watch this movie, let's face it. We're not here to watch a space movie. We're here to watch a giant man in a rubber lizard suit destroy everything. The movie always just cuts away to the cast figuring stuff out, and then cut back to the monster destroying shit. The result is no emotional weight to any of destruction at all, other than, you know, kind of like the last, 10 minutes of the film, which admittedly the last 10 minutes of the film I think are pretty solid as a whole. There's just no emotional weight to any of these characters. We don't see anyone getting killed. We don't see anyone in real danger. Yeah, sure, we have a couple shots of people running away, but that's about it. There's no real weight to the destruction that Gilala is causing other than what the characters are saying. What the original Godzilla did extremely well, considering the fact that none of our main characters in that film are actually in Tokyo when it gets destroyed, is it shows in great detail the effects that this attack is having on people by going in close with individuals. The greatest example of this is when, you know, you see the mother holding her 2 children. That's a great example. That's a great way to add personal weight to the destruction of Tokyo. The X from Outer Space is none of this during the entire destruction things. Hell, even Gamera, the Invincible, when Gamera attacks Tokyo for the first time in the original film, there's more weight to that, because you see people partying and suddenly they're trapped and Gamera destroys the building. And what annoys me even more about the structure of this is that the scientists, in order to figure out, you know, a way to kill Gilala, is they have to go to the moon again. And it's literally only one shot of them figuring out what's going on the moon base, them radioing back down to Earth, that they figured it out. And then they fly back to Earth, which takes another 5 minutes of the film, and we have the final confrontation with the UFO, which, again, accomplishes nothing. We never learned what the UFO's motives are. We never learned if they're aliens in there, or if that's just, you know, a part of it, or if that's just what happened to Gilala. If he was left out in space, he'd hatch and turn into another one of them flying egg things. They look kind of like these blood-sucking creatures from Star Trek. Biggest problem I found with this film, you know, along with its structure, because they kind of go hand in hand. The X from Outer Space itself doesn't really know what to do with itself. If that was something the writers wanted, for everything to kind of be like, oh, I don't know what to do here, and the writers intentionally played that up in the film, that would make it would be present in the film. But you see, it's not present in the film. An example of a film where the writers intentionally didn't want things to add up, didn't want things to make sense, didn't want things to, you know, go anywhere. Look at The Big Lebowski. Nothing in that film makes sense. But they did this on purpose, and you see, that's the key difference. This movie comes across as just lackluster writing. The only moment in the film that I felt genuine tension was the actual ending of The X from Outer Space. Our heroes are actually in jeopardy as Gilala destroys FAFC because he wants to absorb the fuel that, you know, the aab-gamma brought back down from space after they fucking went to the moon again. Because our heroes are in general danger. Lisa gets her leg trapped underneath this giant boiler-looking thing, even though later you can see her running just fine. That's kind of dumb, but whatever. But at the same time, you see like Michiko look out the windows, and through the windows you see Gilala approaching. I'm like, that's some actual great shots there. And it really is not a bad climax for this movie at all. The unfortunate thing is by this time we literally do not care about any of the characters, and it's just too little, too late. This is only about 10 minutes worth of the film. You've just had an hour and 10 minutes before that to try to establish these characters as being human beings and not just mindless automatons like the film actually, presents. Because, Lisa is your kind of stereotypical scientist, which I don't really like. One of the things that this movie does a lot, and it genuinely, bugs me, I hate it when scientists, quote-unquote, in films, refer to themselves as scientists. This film does it in droves. I've always found that to be quite lazy. Like, what exactly does scientist mean? What is their area of expertise? That is what they should be saying in general. Not just saying, oh, hey, I'm a scientist. Which this movie does a lot. Like, during the beginning of the film, when they're getting a debriefing, when we're introduced to these characters, one of the characters says, as scientists, this is our job. Like, that is such a piss poor line. Lisa, who is admittedly kind of the main protagonist of this movie, played by Peggy Neal. She's sort of a stereotypical scientist. Other than her supposed romance with Captain Sano, which does tie into the kind of interracial themes that a lot of these horror films had from Shochiku. But other than her romance with kind of Sano that kind of goes nowhere, there's no real character to her either. And she just comes off as kind of a ditz sometimes, like how she'll just like randomly trip and stuff like that to add some fake drama to the film. Like there's one scene when they're bringing Gilalalanium back to... That's such a fucking dumb name. Back down to Earth. She trips randomly, and that's how she accidentally finds why they're getting jammed and everything like that. Really silly. Captain Sano is a no-nonsense captain with absolutely no personality at all, other than that he's extremely serious. So he's boring on that front. You have Michiko, who is the second love interest, who is more energetic than Lisa, I'll give her that, and she certainly has more screen presence than Lisa, because the girl who played Lisa, Peggy Neal, is not an actress at all, but the girl who played Michiko was. She doesn't really go anywhere, and she doesn't grow either, other than that she actually gets with Sano at the ending. We have the comic relief of the film, who I fucking detest like there's no tomorrow. I just detest his character as a whole. He literally goes nowhere. The scientist character, the only reason why he was there was so, the aab-gamma would have to land on the moon. They're not characters. They're just automatons that are just getting us from point A to point B. Which would be fine if the movie was presented in a different fashion and being more like a docudrama. But it's not. And going back to the climax of the film, it left me saying, if the rest of the film had this headset as the climax of the movie did, it wouldn't have been much more enjoyable. It would have been a much more enjoyable film as a whole. If we cared about these characters more. Going back to the music, what I've said before, the music in this film, the music does not fit this film whatsoever. Now, to compare it to another film that I love, another bad film that I genuinely love, The Green Slime. The Green Slime has a silly score, including the theme song. But there are moments where the music at least amps things up and adds atmosphere. Such as, my favorite example being when Gamma 3 is burning up and flying into Earth's atmosphere, all we have are these synthetic gongs playing. It genuinely adds tension to the scene. And therefore, I'd say it's pretty good. Music in film is supposed to aid the story. It's supposed to aid the atmosphere, the aura, the essence of the film. And can sometimes make or break it. For example, Daft Punk with Tron Legacy. If Daft Punk didn't do the music to Tron Legacy, I think the movie would have been a lot worse than what it was. Daft Punk's music, for example, I actually think makes the movie really cool, and quite frankly, why I like it so much. The X from Outer Space's score is jazz. Literally soft jazz, and it really doesn't work because of the tone the film is trying so hard to set. You see, the film itself takes itself relatively seriously, despite, all the dialogue being ludicrous. But yet the music is so lively and silly. An example of this is when the music is extremely energetic and fun, but the situation is presented as the opposite of this. Something that could have easily fixed this, and that could have gone along with that sort of lively jazz music that plays, with simply making Captain Sano or the crew of the aab-gamma as a whole want to antagonize it. They're like, oh, this is a challenge. We'll have fun with this. Something really... It could even be as corny as what I just said. And so they are trying to antagonize this UFO, and then the music would kind of fit more. Because the whole energy of the crew on the ship, and as it's presented in the film, would be much more lively. You see, that would simply fix it. Just a simple little tiny tone changer like that would make the music fit more. The only music in this film that I like, in terms of the film itself, plays over Gilala. Always. Literally, in every scene when Gilala is there, this music plays. And it's a bit unnerving to listen to, and does kind of fit with just what the monster is. A complete mutation, and the music is really weird as a result. It just never stops playing this music whenever Gilala shows up. I'd have changed it up a little bit, is what I'm trying to say. I'm also going to admit, the ending song is nice. The song that literally plays until the end of the film. It's not silly at all, actually. It's actually a very kind of slightly hopeful music, which is kind of the aura that the movie is trying to play off. And it definitely doesn't go against all tonality that the opening credit song is, which, as much as I hate to admit it, I will know that song until the day I die. The effects in this film, what makes a kaiju film, they're good, but they're clunky. Most of the time they are shot straight on. This is from a cinematography standpoint, making Gilala lose his sense of scale. Alright, compare the scenes where Gilala is destroying Tokyo in this film to the scenes where Godzilla is destroying Nagoya in Mothra vs. Godzilla. And you can just see a total tone change in the two and how they're presented. One, Mothra vs. Godzilla is a lot more slower and a lot more dynamic, a lot more epic in scale, but the camera is always lower, making Godzilla look bigger than he really is. Gilala is usually shot straight on, making him lose a lot of that scale. Rarely is this movie shot in a high frame rate, which makes you lose even more sense of scale by how quick the missiles, the tanks, and everything move. Normally, with Godzilla films or even the Gamera films, they would shoot in a high frame rate, to make the monsters move slower, therefore kind of giving off the illusion that they have more mass than they really do. Gilala is hardly ever shot like that. Usually everything is just a regular frame rate, which makes it lose a lot of its scale. The miniatures, like miniature buildings and stuff, are fine, but when you look at the ground units, so like tanks, the missiles, and stuff like that, they look like paper. The missile launchers, in particular, in this film, are just terrible. It's like one frame, the missile's there, and then the next it's gone, and it literally looks like there's no weight to these things at all. And it's kind of funny, because just a year later, we'd have Destroy All Monsters, which quite frankly has, in my opinion, one of the best missile launching scenes ever, and that's when, the 4 monsters attack Tokyo. It's a great example of what, miniature visual effects can do. Now, a year previous to this, with the X from Outer Space, you can see what it can't do. The buildings and stuff look fine, but they would look better at night to hide some of their faults. For example, there is genuinely an attack scene where Gilala attacks at night. The miniatures looked a lot better, and so did Gilala. Gilala looked a lot more menacing, especially with his glowing red eyes. Looked a lot more menacing at night than he does during the day. He looks kind of silly. Actually, he doesn't look kind of. He is silly during the day, and the miniatures don't look anywhere near as good during the day, and that's because you can't hide some of the flaws. One of the reasons why, again, and I've said this many times, why Agent Tsuburaya chose to shoot, the original Godzilla at night, was because he could hide a lot of his chunky flaw, his clunky flaws, and so on and so forth. The space stuff is actually pretty good, visually, from a visual standpoint. It's pretty good, especially since they actually used black for the background color for space instead of the dark blue like normal. Most films use dark blue, because it's easier to light and so on and so forth, and you can still see the background. Well, black is actually what space would look like. And this movie genuinely does use black, which I'm like, oh, that's actually really cool. Battle in Outer Space is another movie where they did that. There is one area in this film that I will kind of praise, and genuinely praise, with the visual effects, and that is the wire works for the aircraft, the jets, are seriously what this movie does best. The jets look great. There's constant movement, and I will give this too. There's constant movement with these things, even with Gilala in one of the shots. For example, when they're killing Gilala, like there's several scenes where you see Gilala kind of melting, and in the background you'll see jets flying by and stuff like that. And they weren't added in post. They were actually there on set, which is very complicated to do. But they look really good because they move quick, really, really, really quick, and they're constantly, they're constantly a presence there. So I'll generally praise the wire effects for the jets and stuff like that. There's only one exception to this, and that's during the city, one smashes into Gilala's face, and the explosion is a bit delayed. So what you see is like the jet hit his face, then turn, and then explode. And it's a really, really silly and embarrassingly bad shot. But if that's the only scene where that happened, I'll genuinely give this movie praise for it. And Gilala is amazing. Gilala, the monster himself, is actually really cool, but they don't do anything with him, and that's the flaw with the monster here. There is no character to Gilala at all. No real reason for us to be scared of this monster, and that goes into a lot of this movie doesn't have any weight behind the destruction scenes. However, despite what other people will say, I believe the design of Gilala, as silly as it is, does kind of work, because it's explained by our characters that he is a mutation due to being exposed to our own atmosphere, our own oxygen. And nothing about him seems to be remotely coherent. For example, he's got a beak, bulging red eyes, gray and bubbly-like skin. He's got antennas on his head. He can turn into a flying space egg and spits fireballs. There's nothing about this monster that makes any sense. It looks like something straight out of Ultraman. And to give them credit, this is certainly a design you remember. I mean, I haven't met anyone who can't remember, who's seen the film, who can't remember the design of this monster. And it's certainly better than what Daiei's first attempted with Gamera. And I'm not talking about, the sequels. I'm talking about the first, Gamera the Invincible. And I also think Gilala, though we make fun of it a lot, and I made fun of it with Jacob Baker on Creature Feature Double Feature, his roar, I believe, is fine too because of how weird it is. It kind of fits with how weird he is. Sounds like they recorded a pig squealing for several of them, mixed with just a man screaming into a microphone, and you reverb it. And it kind of works. Specifically, his death grunts when they're shooting missiles at him and he starts melting are really actually unnerving as he slowly melts away, and it works, and I genuinely like that from a sound design standpoint. And speaking of his death, what actually kills him is also interesting. As he gets covered in what looks like whipped cream, his death is very unique amongst kaiju deaths. Most of the Ultraman monsters just kind of blow up. Godzilla hardly ever killed any of his opponents. This one is definitely unique and kind of gruesome if you look at it, considering that stuff is his blood. Gilala could be, as hinted, presented like something straight out of John Carpenter's The Thing. A mutation that absorbs all energy and keeps growing in power. Which is why I say you could really make something dark and disturbing, like almost David Cronenberg-esque, out of something like Gilala in the X from Outer Space. Especially if I were to remake the X from Outer Space, that's how I'd do it. Is I'd play a body horror with the monster itself. Me talking about the structure of the film and so on and so forth. Here is what my version of this movie would have been like. The aab-gamma is sent to the moon to deliver a new energy source found on Earth. They encounter a UFO that spits eggs all over them. They capture an egg and commence to the moon, especially since being exposed to the strange gas-like substance that seriously makes one of them ill. Look at that, I just saved a shit ton of time right there. On the moon, they discover the UFO was actually alive, and that this is an egg laid by it that was attracted to the energy source that the aab-gamma housed, which we learn also powers the FAFC on Earth. Gilala then hatches and flies to Earth. Our heroes, so Lisa, Michiko, Sano, Comic Relief, blah, 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 go to Earth and see the monster constantly mutating and growing. And I'd keep all of his powers the same, but would add to his design each time we see him. Every time we see Gilala in each scene, he would look a little different. You know, he'd be absorbing people, in which I'd show it. Absorbing people, anything he can get his hands on, and absorb them into energy. So he would eventually go from looking like what we actually get in the original movie to much more de-unified and more like a walking amalgamation of whatever it absorbed. We see bones at some point, maybe from people, perhaps we see eyes start sprouting on his body. And as I said earlier, I would really play up the body horror in this film. Our heroes kill Gilala with some kind of strange compound emitted by the UFO, and they replicate it. It's also what makes, you know, that scientist sick, so there's a point to that being there. And he's shot into space, and the ending is pretty much the same as what it is in the original film. But all of that being said, what I just said, and what I've been saying over the last 40 minutes, is it really worth it? Was it really worth digging into and analyzing? Because as this movie ended, suddenly it struck to me what this movie was. This movie is like King Kong Escapes. This movie is like King Kong Escapes. It's not meant to be taken seriously and truly analyzed. The X from Outer Space is meant to entertain children and for them to have fun. That's it. And I could honestly see, you know, children being bored during the first half of this film. But the second half of the film, there's just so much weird shit going on that I could picture kids generally sitting down and having fun with it. I showed Merrick, one of the kids that my mother took care of, the ending to The X from Outer Space, and he loved it, just as I did when I was a kid. And it suddenly came across, I'm like, oh, you know what? Fuck it. This is one reason why I love the Showa era of kaiju tokusatsu movies above any of the other ones. This film, it's silly, it's fun, it's dumb, it's ludicrous, and it brings such joy to me. This movie is not good at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a terrible, terrible movie. But it still left me smiling and having a ball watching it and picking it apart and everything like that. I had a ball watching it, and I'm like, you know what? That's because it's feeding that inner child. You know, I'm like, as a kid, you know, it truly reminded me in this recent viewing why I loved it so much as a kid, because of how stupid and dumb this movie is. It has such kid logic to it that analyzing it from a genuine critical standpoint makes almost no sense at all. It's why I always recommend this to people to check out in some way or fashion, to watch this mess of a movie. It's fun to sit there with friends and genuinely watch the film and try to absorb the craziness that is it. And I don't mean like, let's get drunk and watch a film either. I mean genuinely sit down, watch the movie together, and just decipher what the fuck is happening on screen. I literally could talk about this movie all day. And I think I've talked about it too long. And I recommend you listen to the audio commentary I did with Jacob Baker, the Kaiju Maker, on Creature Feature Double Feature for more insight. But basically, as a whole, this movie is a dumb, silly movie that I'll always go back to and enjoy as a whole, despite everything that I've just complained about. It's why I like the movie. It's so terrible, and I have so much fun watching this silly romp that is The X from Outer Space. So in the end, leave a comment saying your thoughts on The X from Outer Space, whether you liked it, detested it, or somewhere in the middle. Hit the subscribe button for all up-to-date information, or all up-to-date videos that I am putting out there, and skits and so on and so forth. Like AN Productions on Facebook for all up-to-date information about what we're doing here at AN Productions. You can now follow us on Twitter, which the link is in the description below, like the Godzilla saga, for all to see how, you know, those books are coming along. And you know what? In the end, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying sayonara.